Hello, class. Praise the Lord. I hope you all are preparing yourself well for your exams. So let's not waste our time and quickly get into the next set of our general epistles. So today we are going to talk about the letters by Peter and the letters by John. And in the last lecture, we will be talking about the letter of Revelation, the book of Revelation. So let's get started. Okay, so here before you, you can see that we are going to have the survey of the general epistles of Peter and John. So in the last class, we had the survey on the books of all the letters of the Hebrews and then James and Jude. So today we are talking about Peter and John. Okay, so let's see what's happening in these letters. Okay, so first we'll talk about the letters or epistles by Peter, and then we'll talk about the epistles by John. So Peter became the leader of the newborn church in Jerusalem, as Jesus had predicted in Matthew 16 verse 13 to 20, and he was the first to preach the gospel after the resurrection in Jerusalem at Pentecost. So if you remember what happened in the book of Acts, and if you remember how the disciples were in the book of Matthew, so if you remember all those things, you will remember that Jesus said, I will build my church on this rock. So he was talking probably about Peter at that time because his name means rock. Okay, so that is what the reference over here is. And then we can see that Peter was the first person who actually started preaching, and also the whole crowd, around 3,000 people were saved on that day. And after the death and the resurrection of Jesus, Peter was the person who took the charge and the leadership, and he became the one whom all the disciples look up to, and he became a great leader and the first person to preach after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So he had first met Jesus through his brother Andrew, that we can see in First John chapter 1 verse 40 to 42. But it was at Capernaum where Jesus had called him from his fishing business to become his disciple. So all this we can see in the Gospels. After a lifetime of preaching and teaching, as he traveled all over Rome or Roman world, accompanied with his wife, he writes to the churches regarding their attitude toward suffering and persecution to give them comfort, hope, encouragement, so that they can stand firm. So after we do not know much is not known because Bible does not say much, but otherwise we have other literatures which talk about the stories of Peter and other disciples also. So we can see that throughout his life, after the death of Jesus Christ and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, he started preaching and teaching, and he traveled all around, especially in the Roman areas or the Roman world. And he was accompanied with his wife. We all know that he was married. He did not leave his wife, but he was accompanied with his wife wherever he went, and he preached and he taught, and she was very supportive towards him. And he writes to these churches regarding their attitude towards suffering, because this is a time of persecution when the churches are being persecuted. So he writes to them about the suffering that they are going to go through, and how their attitude should be towards the persecution and the sufferings. And he also wrote so that he could give comfort and hope and encouragement in these times where they were desperately needed all these things. So in his second epistle, we can see that he opposes the false teachers who had appeared in the church. So we can see what is happening is there is oppression, there is persecution coming from Nero, there is persecution coming from outside, and also from within. There are some false teachers who are traveling, just like the disciples, they're also traveling and spreading these false teachings in the different churches and breaking up the churches and pulling out the people from the belief and the faith in Jesus Christ. So he is facing death at the moment when he is writing this letter. We can see in chapter 1 verse 14 that he is facing death at the moment, and but still he is concerned for the church. Okay, he's concerned for the church being beset and confused by the false teaching about the Christian behavior and the return of Christ. So he emphasizes on true knowledge. So he simply says that they need to get the true knowledge. They need to rely on the true knowledge that they have already been given by the disciples and the apostles. So they should not be confused by the new teachings that are coming up. So he's very worried and he is bothered about these Christian churches, and he is worried that these people, the Christians, should not deviate from the true faith that they have already had, or the true knowledge that they have already received, and fall for these false teachings and false teachers. He is also emphasizing on the behavior of the people, and the Christian behavior, the Christian attitude that they should have, and also the true concepts about the return of Jesus Christ, that he is going to return soon. And all those things he wants to emphasize, all those things he wants to tell the church, because he's worried about them for the situations that they are going through from outside and also from within. These letters are important as they are written by a great leader of the church in area of great importance at the end of his life. So we all know that the end part of our lives are very important, and especially when the leaders are involved. So we can see they have a lot of experience, they have a lot of jewels to give, a lot of a lot of things that they can give to the people. So it's very important letter, because Peter is almost at the end of his life, he's almost going to die, he's almost going to be martyred. And at this moment he is concerned about the church, and he is the topmost leader. As we can see, he was the first person on whom we can see that Jesus depended, and Jesus said that this is the person on whom I'm going to build my church. So he was the first leader of the Christian community at that time, and he was the person whom Jesus chose basically to start the whole movement of church. Okay, so all those things are there. So he it makes Peter one of the most important pillars of the Christian ministry. So we can see that he is about to die, and he is you know saying some important things to the important churches, and he wants the people to know all these things. And his words are important because he's one of the most important leaders of that time. So the tradition says that he was crucified head downwards in Rome during the Emperor Nero's terrible persecution in 64 AD. So we have to remember that Jesus died straight erect, but he was also told that he will be crucified, but he said that he is not worthy of being crucified the way his master has been crucified, his Lord has been crucified. So he said to hang him upside down. So they hung him on a cross upside down during the reign of the terrible persecution of Nero in 64 AD. So that is how he was martyred in that way. Let's look into the letters sent by or written by Apostle Peter, or the disciple Peter. The first letter. Okay, let's talk about. Okay, let's talk about the first letter of Peter. Stands along with the First John as the two general epistles whose authorship was never doubted by the early church. Okay, so we're talking about the authorship of Peter right now. So for the first epistle of Peter stands along with First John as the two general epistles whose authorship has never been doubted. So we can see the First John and the First Peter's authorship has never been doubted by the early churches. His name as the author is in the first verse of the earlier manuscripts, in all the earlier manuscripts. So we can see that his name is there in the first verse, so it's believed that it is written by Peter. There are clear similarities in the sermon in the book of Acts, in the both thought and style. So we can see that the sermon that Peter gave in the book of Acts and this first letter, there is a lot of similarity in the style and in the thought. So there is usually, very rarely it is doubted that this epistle was written by Peter. It also clearly reflects his life situations. Okay, so we can see whatever the epistle is talking about, it simply talks about the life that he has gone through and the situations that he has seen, and the churches and the situation of the church and that type of Christianity that he's talking about in this letter. So there are many references to his experience with the Lord Jesus in the gospel. Important ones are being the transfiguration, which Peter could never have forgotten. The early church fathers accepted his authorship, and First Clement and Polycarp clearly support his authorship. Other early Christian traditions also accept his authorship, but in the last century, some scholars challenged the Petrine authorship on the basis of language and style. Okay, so earlier churches fathers, all the early church fathers have always accepted that this letter was written by Peter himself. Even the Christian tradition accepts it automatically that the authorship belongs to Peter. But lately, as the critical scholars have come in and the modern scholarship has taken place, and a lot of research is being done, so some of them have challenged that Peter probably is not the author of these letters because of the fine language and because of the style that the letter has been written in. So they say that it was too good. Okay, it was a too good Greek for a fisherman. So fishermen, we know the kind of language they speak, and how very much how educated they are or literate they are. So they doubt because Peter was a fisherman, probably his writing skills were doubted and his style was doubted. So on the basis of that, some of the scholars they say that probably Peter has not written this letter. So one writer claims to note parallels to the writings of Silas in First and Second Thessalonians. Okay, so we can also see that some say that probably it is Silas or Silas who has written this letter, because he finds some scholars say that they find parallels between Silas's writing and Peter's writing. So yet this can mean that Peter used a secretary. Okay, Peter used a scribe, as did Paul in his writing of some of the letters, and hence these arguments seem baseless, because you can have the thought, you can have the style, and there you might be having an amanuensis, or you might be having a scribe, or you might be having some help or secretary who is there to write for you. So the letter was probably written from Rome, as we can see in chapter 5, verse 13. Okay, so the Babylon being a code for it in the first century. Okay, so we can see that probably it was written from Rome at the time of the break of Nero's persecution, possibly in around 63 AD, and around 64 AD, Peter has died. So Peter and John Mark with him, and Paul's companion Silas or Silvanus to help him to write the letter. So we can see that Peter had some people around him, which were probably John Mark was with him, and then we can see that Silas was with him, or Silvanus. So we can see that these people were with him, and probably they helped him in writing the letter. But the main content that we can see, the thought and the content, everything was what Peter wanted to write, and they were just scribes for him. So the letter, let's talk about the audience to whom this letter has been written to. So the letter is addressed to the Christians in the 5 provincial districts of Asia Minor, which is today known as Turkey. Okay, today we don't call it Asia Minor, today we call Turkey, who were threatened by persecution. So this letter is basically addressed to the people living in Asia Minor or Turkey, and those who were being persecuted in those areas. So Peter describes them as those scattered. Okay, he describes, or he gives the word scattered for them in the world, chapter 1 verse 1, or exiles of dispersion. Okay, this is according to NRSV. So we can see that he calls these people who are being persecuted in these areas as those who are scattered in the world, or those who are exiles of dispersion. Though he uses a very typical Jewish expression, he is talking of Gentile Christians, not Jews. Okay, so we have to be very clear that he is using, because he's a Jew, he is using a very Jewish expression over here when he's talking about this being scattered or exiles of dispersion. But he is not talking about the Jewish people. He's not talking about the Jews. He's talking about Gentile Christians. So basically, his audience are the Gentile Christians. His audience is not the Jews in this letter. His audience are the Gentile Christians who are living in Turkey at the moment. So they were living like foreigners. Okay, they are living like foreigners or scattered in those lands in Asia Minor, being persecuted and ostracized by their pagan neighbors, like the Jews scattered in the world. So he simply says that the way they are living just like just like foreigners in their own land in Asia Minor, and they are being persecuted or ostracized or means just rejected by their pagan neighbors because of the belief that they are having in, because they have started believing in Jesus Christ, just like the Jews were scattered in the world after this persecution and all. So the letter intended to encourage those suffering for Christ's sake, and the basis for this encouragement is found in the sufferings of Christ himself. So basically, he's trying to encourage those Gentile Christians who are suffering for the name of Christ, who are being persecuted or ostracized or beaten or threatened or rejected because they have accepted Jesus Christ and because they are living for Jesus Christ, and so they are suffering because of his name. And so he wants to encourage them, because he says that Christ himself suffered, Christ himself was rejected, Christ himself was ostracized by his own people. So that's what he is giving here, and he's encouraging the people that they should also, just like Jesus Christ, be able to suffer and bear those sufferings during these times. So it also encourages all believers, husband, wives, masters and slaves, elderly and the laity, to live godly lives in the presence of unbelievers as a testimony to Jesus Christ. So he is saying that everybody, all the Gentile Christians, basically all those people who believe in Jesus Christ, all those who are following Jesus Christ, be it husband and wife, be it masters and slave, be it elderly and laity, be it children. So everybody, they should live an exemplary life. They should live a life of example before others so that Christ may be glorified. Before, they should live a worthy life, they should live a Christian life, they should have good behavior, a proper life, following Jesus Christ, not only in words but also in action. Living, they should be living testimonies among the unbelievers for the sake of Jesus Christ, so that Jesus can be testified through their lives among the unbelievers, and they can also see that godliness in their life, the Christ's love in their life, and they can also turn towards Jesus Christ. So he's asking everyone, as couples, as families, as master and slaves, as elderly, the way they treat each other, the way they live, the way they talk, and everything, they need to reflect the example of Jesus Christ. They should live as a testimony for Jesus Christ. So let's look into the outline of the first epistle of Peter. Chapter 1, verses 1 to 2 is salutation. Chapter 1, verse 3 to chapter 2, verse 12, a holy people of God. Chapter 2, verse 13 to chapter 3, verse 7, learning to be submissive. Chapter 3, verse 8 to chapter 5, verse 11, suffering as Christians. And lastly, chapter 5, verse 12 to verse 14 is conclusion. Now, quickly, let's look at the survey of the second epistle of Peter. So here we're not going to talk about much of its authorship, but definitely it is little disputed, so we will be talking about it. So the second letter of Peter is very different in style, language, and subject from the first epistle, okay, of the first letter, and is therefore one of the most controversial and disputed letters in regard with authorship of the New Testament. The differences could be due to the change of amanuensis or the scribe, or perhaps Peter wrote it himself. So probably if Peter has not written the first letter and some scribe has been used in the first letter, in writing the first letter, so the second letter has been written by another scribe or different person, or Peter himself would have written this letter. So the authors or the writers would be the writers could be different of both the epistles because the style is little different. So there is also considerable similarity to the letter of Jude. Okay, so there is quite a lot of similarity that we see in the second Peter and the letter of Jude. Hence, some scholars also believe that it could be a pseudo-epigraphic letter written by the disciples of Peter, copying the letter of Jude. So probably after the death of Peter, they would have written in the name of Peter, some of his disciples, some of Peter's disciples from the school of Petrine. So they would have written in the name of Peter a letter. So this is called a pseudo-epigraphic letter, and probably they copied material from Jude as well. Okay, so this is one of the consideration. This is one of the assumptions that some of the scholars have given regarding the second letter. It is the least quoted by the early church, who questions its authorship but later attested its genuinity in accepting it in the canon. So early churches also actually questioned its authorship, and so they did not quote most. This is the least quoted letter, or so many of them did not quote from this letter at all, though they quoted from almost every other letter, but this was the least quoted letter from. And later on, we can see as the time passed, they accepted it as Peter's letter, and it was taken into the canon. It was probably written in to the same audience as the first letter, though with a different aim to warn them of the false teachers who had invaded the church. So if you remember, the first letter was about encouraging of building hope in them, and making them strong in the time of persecution. Okay, but the second letter has a different theme, has a different topic completely. It is dealing it is for to the same audience definitely, but it is warning them of the false teachers because of the presence of the false teachers that has invaded the church, and they are trying to ruin the church, to break the church, to divide the church from within, and to take the people into the wrong direction, into the false teachings. So here this letter is basically in regard with that, and he is warning the people, the same people whom he was encouraging in the last letter, to be strong in the times of persecution. So the same people he is also talking to them here, and he is actually warning them to be careful, to be aware, to be away from the false teachers and the false teachings that is creeping inside the church. If it was written by Peter, okay, if this letter happens to be written by Peter, it would have been towards the end of his life, when he was facing death. Okay, when he was facing death, in chapter 1 verse 14 we can see. And so probably it could have been around 66 to 68 AD, just prior to his martyrdom. So probably this was the last letter which he wrote to these people, and just before the martyrdom, that is between 66 to 68 AD. So definitely it is before the fall of the destruction of the temple. Okay, let's look into the outline of Second Peter. Chapter 1 verses 1 to 2, salutation. Chapter 1 verse 3 to 11, instructions to holy living. Chapter 1 verse 12 to 21, the authenticity of Peter's message. Chapter 2 verses 1 to 22, warning against false teachers. Chapter 3 verse 1 to 16, the coming of the Lord. And lastly, chapter 3 verse 17 to 18, conclusion. Okay, so just now we just had a glance or a survey of the first two letters of Peter. Now we are going to jump into the letters by John. Okay, so we've already done the Gospel of John. Now we are going to do the letters of John, the first three letters of John. So the general assumption is that the fourth Gospel and these three letters, first, second, and third John, along with the book of Revelation, were written by the same apostle, that is John, or Apostle John. Some modern scholars have claimed that these letters have come from the Johannine school, not from the apostle himself, though there is no proof of that. So some of the scholars, these scholars, they try to find out something, and there is, even if there is one small, reason, so they try to tell us like whether this authorship, or there is an issue in the authorship or the topic or the audience or whatever. So this is where some modern scholars have done a lot of research, and they have tried to understand the authorship of the epistles, so, and the Revelation and the Gospel. So initially all believed that the Gospel of John, first, second, and third letter of John, and Revelation was written by Apostle John himself. But later on, the modern scholars have claimed and have been stating that probably it is not John, the one individual person who has written all five of the literatures, but probably five of the literatures, but it could have been that somebody from the Johannine school or the disciples of John would have also participated in writing. Okay, so after the commencement of the Jewish war in 66 AD, which resulted in the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, the Apostle John now is in his mid 60s. He's quite old, in his mid 60s, left the city and moved to Asia Minor. Okay, so he left the city of Jerusalem and he moved to Asia Minor after the destruction of the temple, and he lived in Ephesus and ministered over there. Okay, he lived in Ephesus and started ministering over there. With the death of Paul and the province of Asia becoming the center of two dangerous movements of emperor worship and Gnosticism, John took up residence in Ephesus, and for over 30 years, it became his own place for supervision for the churches in the province, in that province. Okay, so we can understand that with the fall of the temple, with the destruction of the temple, and Asia becoming Asia Minor, we can see that that place, sorry, becoming the center of the emperor movement, where emperor was very powerful at that time. and there's a lot of Gnosticism taking place in those areas. So he moved to Ephesus at that time, and he stayed there for 30 years, where he ministered over there as the elder of the church, as the a main head of the church of Ephesus, churches of Ephesus in that province. So the province of Ephesus was basically handled, the Christian community was handled by John in those 30 years. So John wrote his gospel and the letters from Ephesus itself till he was sent to exile on Patmos Island, where he was sent offshore to Patmos Island, from where basically he wrote the book of Revelation. So probably he wrote these three letters from Ephesus, where he was staying and where he was ministering and where he was leading the church over there. So these letters, being some of the last, seem to be very important to study. As you know, the last words, the last epistles, the last books are very important or very important for learning of any of the apostles and disciples, or any leader in that case. Okay, so let's take a look at the first letter of John now, and let's talk about the authorship of the first letter. The style of the first letter of John is so close to the Gospel of John that no one has ever questioned its authorship till the 20th century. Only recently, people have started questioning the authorship of the first letter of John. So, though John's Gospel was written to bring men to faith, this letter is clearly written by the same person to reassure Christians about their faith and to renew their confidence that was shaken by the false teaching. So he is also dealing with false teachings, and he wants to reassure, he wants to strengthen the Christians in the teachings that they have been given about Christ, and he wants to renew their confidence and encourage their confidence so that they may not fall for the false teachers or false teaching which is prevalent at that time. So some modern writers have disputed its authorship based on the minor stylistic differences and have claimed it was written by the disciples of Johannine school and probably not by John. However, these minor differences are based on the different situations addressed to, and therefore cannot be valid for indicating that John was not the author and somebody else was the author. So it can be that little differences are there, minor differences are there, minor stylistic differences are there, because he's addressing a certain situation, a different situation, or he is in a different situation. So it happens that the writing style a little bit changes, the words change, the expression changes a little bit, but that does not mean that it is not the same person who is writing and somebody else has written the letter. So both Eusebius and Irenaeus confirm that it is written by Apostle John in Ephesus, probably around 85 AD. Let's look at the purpose why this letter was written. So John's letter, as his gospel, was written to encounter the early form of Gnosticism that was developing speedily within the church. So we are talking about Jesus's deity, we are talking about Jesus's humanity, okay, and we're talking about the dualism, where the spirit is holy and the body is evil, or the material is evil. So all these teachings, the Gnosticism, so it was developing and it was moving very fast, and it was speeding up in the churches, and the people were falling for it. So he is basically writing, he has written the letter and the first letter of John, and he's also written the gospel that he wrote. It was to encounter these wrong teachings, these false teachings that are creeping into the church very steadily. So these were being taught by men who were once members of the church. So the biggest threat or the biggest problem over here was that who are teaching these Gnostic ideas. These Gnostic ideas were being taught by the members who were first members of the church, who were once members of the church and now have detracted or derailed themselves, or they have fallen into the teachings of Gnosticism. And now they are, instead of teaching about Jesus Christ's deityship, instead of teaching about the Jesus being the creator and the sacrifice and the priest and all those things, that Jesus is the salvation, instead of teaching that, they have become Gnostics and they are teaching something else, which is not which is not right according to the Christian faith. It's very much Gnostic, and we all know what is Gnosticism. So these people who were members of the church earlier have are now involved in teaching Gnosticism. So the fear was, if these men are successful in teaching these teachings and are allowed to stay in the church and speak to the people and teach, there is there is a lot of probability that the other members of the church will also be influenced and trust what these people are teaching and believe in them and fall for them. Okay, so that was the biggest terror, or that was the biggest problem at that time, issue at that time, which John was dealing with. So they had made a clear distinction, these teachers or these false teachers. So they had made a clear distinction between the spiritual, that is pure, and material, that is evil, based on the Greek philosophy and teaching, and which is also stated in Hindu religion. Okay, so we can see, you can be familiar with that, where the spirit is pure and the material is evil, which is a very Greek thought, and it is also possibly that you have studied or learned it in Hinduism also. So these teachings so stated that God, being spirit, could not be involved in matter that is evil. That means evil, that means a material or world. Okay, so Jesus being God, he could not have taken the form of humanity. He could not have taken a human form. He could not have taken the form of a flesh and come. He could not have taken this form of flesh and come to the earth. If that is so, then that means that Jesus is not holy. Jesus is not God. So it was a basic. It was an attack basically at the root of the Christian faith and doctrine, where God took upon himself, Jesus being God, took upon himself the flesh and came in the form of human and died as a perfect sacrifice. Okay, and then resurrected. So this basically is an attack at the root of Christian faith. This simply meant that firstly, God could not be the creator. Okay, it simply meant that God could not be creator, and secondly, Jesus in his incarnation was not real. Therefore, they denied that Jesus could have come in flesh. And if Jesus came in flesh in that way, that this form of heresy was Doceticism, which stated that Christ only appeared. Okay, Christ only appeared to have come in flesh, and therefore he did not leave any footprints when he was walking on the earth. So the Docetics, or this is a form of Gnosticism, which believed that Christ could not have come. If he is God, he could not have come in flesh. He could not have incarnated and could not have come in flesh. So it was only an appearance. It was not reality that Jesus had become a human. But we can see Jesus only appeared. Okay, it was only an appearance of Jesus in flesh. That is why it's very strange that they are saying that Jesus did not leave any footprints, but it is not so. So John was attacking this view very strongly in his letter, as he did in the gospel. So both from his personal experience of Jesus and from theological experience or point of view, he is basically attacking and challenging these Gnostic and Docetic views. The third problem of this teaching was because they believed that nothing done to the body could tarnish the purity of the spirit, it led to immorality. Okay, because they felt that you do anything with your body is material, it is evil. So you do anything with your body, it will not affect your spirit because the spirit is holy. So keep your spirit holy and do whatever with your body. So it led to immorality, okay, and immoral living and immoral life. Which is again not Christian, which is again not biblical, which is against anti what the faith is or Christian faith is. So John therefore urges the believers to walk in the light with God and their fellow Christians, to confess their sins, to love God and others, to purify themselves from the worldly lusts, to follow the spirit of truth, to discern the false teaching, and to esteem Jesus Christ as the true God. So this is the gist of what John is teaching in this letter, the first epistle of John. So let me just repeat it once again, because this is the crux of what John is actually teaching to the believers of the church of Ephesus right now. So he's talking about the believers so that they should walk in the light with God and their fellow Christians, to confess their sins to one another, to love God and others equally, to purify themselves from the world's lust, to follow the spirit of truth, to discern the false teaching, and to esteem Jesus Christ as the true God. Let's look at the outline. Chapter 1, verse 4, prologue. Chapter 1, verse 5 to chapter 2, verse 29, fellowship with the Father and the Son. Chapter 3, verse 1 to chapter 4, verse 21, love among God's people. Chapter 5, verse 1 to 2, verse 12, true faith. Chapter 5, verse 13 to 21, conclusion. Let's go into the second epistle of John. Let's talk about the authorship and the audience. So the brief second letter contains much of the same language and thought as the first letter. So there is little or no doubt about its authorship, since he identifies himself as the elder. Okay, he does not call himself as John and all that, but he calls himself as the elder of the church. Some of the scholars have claimed that probably it is not John who has written the letter. This, however, is probably not right, as he has been living as an elder in Ephesus for several years, and so he is the senior elder of the Ephesian church, which is appropriately used, which he appropriately uses for himself to entitle himself. So he does not say anything, he does not give him any higher entitlement, though he was a bishop probably of Ephesus at that time, but he simply says that he is the elder of the church. Let's talk about the audience. So it is addressed to the chosen lady and her children. Chosen lady and her children. But the corporate tone, so it is not a personal letter. It is not the tone of the letter is not personal. It is a corporate tone. Okay, so that means he's talking to a lot of people. He's talking to a church. So it is basically addressed to. So addresser is the elder, and the addressee is the chosen lady and her children. But the letter has a corporate tone, so it suggests that the letter is written to the church rather than an individual. So the children, therefore, would have been the members of the church, and the lady is John's own church. Okay, so the lady is the church, and the members of the church are her children. So John emphasizes the importance of love, and that for a Christian, love and truth should go hand in hand. So if you know the truth, you will love. Okay, that's what John simply says, that if you know the truth, it will make you love. You will love. Okay, so John emphasizes on the importance of love, and that Christian love and truth, they both go hand in hand. If John is combating the same issue of false teachers here also as in the first letter, and he's also warning them to tighten up in hospitality and not welcome these traveling teachers whose teachings contradict the fundamental truth of Jesus Christ. So he's basically asking the church to be careful, to be discerning, and to be, not to allow everyone and anyone who wants to come into the church and teach. So there he's saying you should scrutinize, you should be discerning, and you should not allow anybody and everybody to just enter into the church and start teaching. So he's saying that you have to tighten up the hospitality, be wise in your hospitality, and allow only those who to teach come in and teach in the church and stay in the church whose thought pattern or whose teachings fall in line with the fundamental truth of Jesus Christ. If it contradicts, then do not allow them into the church. Okay, so he's very strict in that, and he's warning them, and he's asking them to tighten in that area. So don't just be so good to so there is love, and love should also operate with the discipline. Love should also operate for the good of the church and the benefit of the church. So allowing these false teachers to enter, it's like foolishness, because it is going to break the church. So let's look at the outline of Second John. Chapter verses 1 to 3, salutation, then verses 1 to 4 to 11, encouragement and warning, and lastly verses 12 to 13 is the conclusion. So lastly, let's move towards the third letter of John. Okay, so the title is wrong. Please correct the title. It is the third letter of John. So the third letter of John is also written by the elder. It is entitled or written by the elder. It is written to Gaius. Okay, this is written to Gaius. It is a letter of recommendation. Okay, this is a letter of recommendation for Demetrius, who is a traveling missionary, verses 7 to 8, who needs hospitality by the local church while he is evangelizing in that area. So you have to remember, in the second letter, John has asked the church not to be so loose in their hospitality that they allow everyone and anyone into the church. So they had made amendments, and they had become strict in not allowing the church these people to enter, and all those things are happening over there. So even the other people have taken charge, and they are not allowing John and the people sent by John to enter into the church. This is also happening over there, that the other party has taken the charge, and the other party is, you know, working, functioning over there. They are not allowing John and the other people who are recommended by John to enter into the church, and they are strictly prohibiting them. So he is recommending Demetrius. Okay, he's recommending Demetrius and saying that welcome him, please take him inside the church and allow him, because he's traveling missionary and he has been evangelizing this area for a couple of time now, some time now. So he may have been John's messenger in this case. It is also to give notice of John's visit. So he probably is also taking a notice or information that John is also going to visit, about John's visit to the church in Dias. Okay, the locality which seems to have been taken over by man named Diotrephes, who refuses to receive John or anyone sent by him. So we can see that Diotrephes is a person who is anti-John, or who is not standing in you know in agreement with what John's teachings are, and so he's of the opposite party. So he's not allowing anyone sent by John, or he's not even allowing John to come into the church. So John is sending an messenger, Demetrius, and he's also saying that he's recommending him because he's the elder of the church. He's recommending that allow him in the church, and Demetrius also carries information that John is also about to visit the church. So in contrast to him, the life of Gaius is very, very different. Okay, so let's look into the authorship. So this letter is so similar to the other two letters that there should be no doubt, but that there is the common authorship. So it is John who has written this letter, is accepted easily by everyone. Let's look at the outline. So verses 1 to 2, salutation, verses 3 to 8, commending Gaius, verses 9 to 11, commending Diotrephes, verses 11 to 12, commending Demetrius, verses 13 to 15 is the conclusion. Okay, so this is the general epistles, the section on general epistles. Last class we finished the first three, and today we have finished Peter and John as the general epistles. Okay, there is only one remaining, which will be sent very soon. So the book of Revelation is remaining, that will be sent very soon to you all also. So I request you all to take time and view these lectures and take notes and prepare for your exam. So stay blessed, prepare well, stay focused. Thank you.